Can you imagine living in a place where millions of people struggle to survive on less than $2 a day? Have you ever wondered what it would be like to go to bed and wake up hungry with no drinking water, basic facilities, or even a health center nearby? Welcome to Malawi, not only one of the poorest countries, but also one of the most challenging on the entire African continent. Do you want to know what makes Malawi a country where so many people struggle every day to eat and survive? Then stay until the end, because today we're going to dive headfirst into the challenges that put millions of lives at risk every day. Number 1. Location and geography. Landlocked, Malawi is situated in the interior of the African continent, surrounded by neighbors such as Tanzania to the north, Zambia to the west, and Mozambique to the south and east. With an area of approximately 118,000 square kilometers, the country can be considered small compared to other African nations, but its population density is high. More than 17 million inhabitants live there, and what it lacks in size, it makes up for in diversity. The geography here is fascinating, with mountains, valleys, and plateaus that create breathtaking scenery. Mount Mulanje, for example, is one of the stars, with its Sapitwa peak rising over 3,000 meters, making it the highest point in the country. The climate also has its own dynamics. From November to April, the rains dominate. From May to October, it's dry season. And as the relief is varied, temperatures also change according to altitude. Heat in the lowlands and a cool breeze in the highlands. But it's impossible to talk about geography without mentioning the real gem that gives the country its name, Lake Malawi. Number 2. Lake Malawi. With an area of around 29,000 square kilometers and depths of up to 450 meters, the lake is a marvel of nature and plays a fundamental role in the Malawian economy and culture. The energy that the lake transmits goes beyond simple natural beauty. It is a source of livelihood for millions of people who live on its shores, providing fresh fish and sustaining irrigated agriculture in the region. However, its grandeur contrasts with the harsh reality that affects many Malawians who, despite living on the edge of a giant brimming with resources, face hunger and poverty on a daily basis, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But first, let's get to know the culture and this very special people. Number 3. Malawian people. Despite all the challenges they face, Malawi is known as the warm heart of Africa. And no, this title isn't just about the climate or the natural beauty, but about the people who live here. Malawians are famous for their hospitality, kindness, and almost natural willingness to help others. In rural communities, it's common to see neighbors coming together to celebrate festivals, share meals, or simply support each other, even when resources are minimal. And it is exactly this community spirit that impresses any visitor. The country is also incredibly diverse. There are more than 15 ethnic groups, each with their own languages, traditions, and customs. And of course, this diversity is reflected in the cuisine. The national dish, nsima, is simple but full of meaning. Made from corn flour, it is served with side dishes such as fish, meat, vegetables, and sauces. Music and dance play a fundamental role in everyday life, expressing the joy, spirituality, and resilience of the people. And look, Malawi's influence extends beyond its borders. Did you know that the famous song Asareje by Las Ketchup was inspired by Malawian culture? Yes, the song's iconic choreography is based on traditional Malawian dances, albeit in a subtle and adapted way. Cool, isn't it? And let us know in the comments, have you ever danced to or known about the Malawian reference in this song? Number 4. History. As welcoming and generous as the people here are, the reality is harsh. Many Malawians face challenges that go far beyond the beautiful landscapes and vibrant culture. And these challenges, as you can imagine, didn't come out of nowhere. They have deep roots in the history of a country that, for decades, was exploited and shaped by colonial interests. To understand the Malawi of today, you have to look to the past, more specifically, to the end of the 19th century, when the territory became the Protectorate of Nyasaland under British rule. The colonizers' aim was clear: to exploit the natural resources as much as possible and use the local workforce on tea, tobacco, and cotton plantations. Large tracts of land were taken from local communities and handed over to white settlers. Meanwhile, Malawians were relegated to less fertile land and forced to work on the plantations, often for miserable wages or in exchange for small pieces of land to cultivate. This system of exploitation not only disrupted local economies, but also created a dangerous dependency on export agriculture. With total control of the international market in the hands of the British, Malawians lost the chance to develop their own industries and seek economic independence. And the problems didn't stop there. Economic exploitation was accompanied by social and political inequalities. The education system was precarious and extremely limited for the local population. Infrastructure such as roads and railroads were built, but not to benefit the Malawians. They only served to transport agricultural products for export, leaving the country internally disconnected. When Malawi gained its independence in 1964, it seemed that the country was ready to begin a new era. But the reality was not so simple. What was supposed to be a new beginning came with enormous challenges. The country inherited a fragile economy, limited infrastructure, and a population with alarmingly low levels of education and health. It was like trying to build a house with the foundations already compromised. And to make matters worse, independence brought with it political issues that to this day define everyday life in Malawi: instability and corruption. Number 5. Political instability and corruption. Since becoming independent, Malawi has faced a political landscape marked by instability. Coup d'etat, troubled elections, and corruption scandals are not isolated events in the country's history. They are part of a constant that hinders both development and the population's trust in institutions. And anyone who thinks this is a thing of the past is mistaken. It is a reality that is still present today. But how did Malawi get to this point? Part of the explanation lies in the political and economic structure inherited from the colonial period. When the country became independent, its first president and dictator, Hastings Kamuzu Banda, took control with an authoritarian attitude that marked Malawi for almost 3 decades, from 1966 to 1994. The band ruled with an iron fist, under a one-party system where the opposition barely existed. Corruption was part of the system, with state resources often being diverted to benefit the president and his allies. During his rule, the concentration of power and lack of transparency created a fragile base that still influences the country. With the transition to democracy in 1994, many expected things to change. And indeed, it was an important milestone. However, political instability remained. Troubled elections and allegations of irregularities have continued to put Malawi in delicate situations. A recent example is the presidential elections of 2019. After Peter Mutharika was declared the winner, the opposition accused him of fraud, and the country entered a period of protests and tension. The situation was so serious that the Supreme Court annulled the results and ordered a new election in 2020. That's when Lazarus Chakwera was elected president. Although it was a victory for democracy, the episode showed how Malawi's institutions still struggle to guarantee stability and transparency. Number 6. Health and education. When it comes to quality of life, Malawi is far from good news. The country ranks at the bottom of the United Nations Human Development Index, HDI, reflecting serious problems in health, education, and income. Life expectancy is low, at around 65 years, and infant mortality is still high. Diseases such as HIV, AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis affect thousands of people every year, placing an enormous burden on an already fragile health system. In many rural areas, hospitals and clinics simply don't exist, and those who need basic medical care often have to walk miles to find it. In education, the situation is also worrying. Although primary education is free, schools face numerous challenges: overcrowded classrooms, a lack of materials, and unprepared teachers. It's not uncommon to find young people, especially girls, dropping out of school before completing basic education and seeking other ways of earning a living, such as prostitution. And the problem goes beyond health and education. Access to drinking water and basic sanitation is limited. To give you an idea, only 60% of the population have access to clean water, while only 25% have adequate sanitation. In other words, millions of people still depend on unsafe water sources, such as contaminated rivers or wells, and open defecation is a reality in both rural and urban areas. The most emblematic example of this reality is Indirande, Malawi's largest and most feared slum in Blantyre, which we'll talk about next. Number 7. Slum. Indirande, one of the most densely populated areas in the country, is a symbol of the daily struggle for survival. Located a few kilometers from the center of Blantyre, Malawi's second-largest city, Indirande is home to more than 200,000 people living in extremely precarious conditions. In the local market, you can find everything: second-hand clothes, fruit, car parts, and even coffins. The contrast is brutal. On the one hand, the informal commerce that keeps the favela's economy alive. On the other, the Nasolo River, which during the dry season is an open sewer and in the rainy season turns into a dangerous current, capable of sweeping away houses, children, and even bridges. The unemployment rate here exceeds 90%, but that doesn't mean that people don't work. Most residents survive on informal jobs, such as carpenters, mechanics, and maids, often in wealthier neighborhoods. It's common to see a large flow of people leaving the favela on foot every day to work in low-paid jobs. The money they earn is used for food, clothes, school fees, and, little by little, to renovate their homes. At weekends, local churches become meeting places, while bars offer a brief respite from the harsh reality. For those visiting for the first time, the conditions may seem shocking. Crowded streets, coffins being sold by the side of the road, children playing in the mud. But for those who really get to know them, what stands out is the strength of the people. Behind every difficulty, there are people trying to build a better life, day after day. And this reality is not exclusive to Indirande. On the contrary, it is repeated in many parts of the country, where 70% of the population lives in rural areas, depending on subsistence farming to survive. Small plantations of maize, cassava, and other staple foods are the basis of many families' economies, when the weather permits. Number 8. Hunger, agriculture, and climate change. Hunger is undoubtedly one of the most serious problems facing Malawi. According to the World Bank, around 72% of the population lives on less than $2 a day. And unfortunately, this situation has only worsened in recent years. The COVID-19 pandemic has only exacerbated the crisis. With economic growth already slow, the country has seen food insecurity and food prices skyrocket. Agriculture, which employs most Malawians, is at the heart of this issue. Here, most crops depend exclusively on rain for irrigation, the so-called rain-fed system. It's a common practice in countries with few resources, but it leaves farmers vulnerable when the weather doesn't cooperate. And in Malawi's case, the weather has been a constant enemy. Severe droughts and devastating floods caused by El Niño have ruined entire harvests, leaving millions of people without food. And when agricultural production falls, prices rise, further affecting families already living on the edge. And if you think that's an exaggeration, just remember the movie The Boy Who Discovered the Wind, available on Netflix. The true story of a young Malawian who built a wind turbine to help his community during an extreme drought is a faithful portrayal of the struggle of many families in the country. And unlike many productions, this film doesn't romanticize. It shows the harsh reality of those living at the mercy of the climate. But climate change doesn't just affect food production. It also exacerbates other problems, such as the lack of drinking water and deforestation. Many families resort to charcoal production to survive, but this comes at a high cost, soil erosion and loss of fertility, which makes the situation even worse. And as if that weren't enough, Malawi still relies heavily on foreign aid. Most of the initiatives to fight hunger and poverty come from international organizations and donations. Without this support, the situation would be even more desperate. But even with aid, the solutions are temporary, and the cycle of vulnerability continues. Number 9. Logistical challenges. To complete Malawi's challenging scenario comes a point that many people have heard about, but few really understand: the geographical location. The country is landlocked, and this is more than just a detail on the map. It's a huge obstacle that directly affects trade, transportation, and, of course, the cost of living. A landlocked country like Malawi depends on its neighbors to import and export products. Everything that comes in or goes out has to pass through foreign ports, which makes logistics more expensive and complicated. The main ports used by Malawi are Beira and Nacala in Mozambique and Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. More recently, the port of Walvis Bay in Namibia has also come into play, especially for fuel imports. But despite alternatives like these, challenges remain. Essential products face long queues and delays, and the lack of an efficient route only increases costs. The result? Higher prices for everything and a direct impact on people's lives. Number 10. The future. Looking at all this, it's impossible not to wonder, why is Malawi facing so many difficulties? Is there a way forward? The answer isn't simple, but one problem always comes up: corruption. It is everywhere, diverting resources that should be used to improve essential areas such as education, health, infrastructure, and rural development. Politicians, civil servants, and even members of organizations end up benefiting from a system that holds back the country's progress. Meanwhile, the population remains trapped in a cycle of poverty and lack of opportunities. Some people compare Malawi to a boat with several holes in it. You can try to get the water out, but if you don't plug the holes, it will keep sinking. And the big challenge here is that these holes are not only numerous, but also difficult to solve. And that brings our Malawi itinerary to an end. But what about you? Did you already know the country? What impressed you most about it? Share your opinion with us in the comments. If you're a fan of exploring mysterious places and stories that defy reality, stay with us. There's still so much to discover together in this bello mundo. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.